very, very excited to be in conversation today with Dr. Ruha and her team at the Led by Foundation. And there they are waving hello to all of the people who joined us here today. Even before I get into conversation with them, my name is Archana and I'm from the ILSS team. And for those of us who are attending this ILSS online series for the first time, I'm going to just take the next couple of minutes to tell us a little bit more about what ILSS is and then move on to the conversation. ILSS is the India Leaders for Social Sector. We're a learning and development organization, primarily looking at all of the leadership development for social sector. And so how we do this is through essentially three big buckets that you see on the slide there. So there is the flagship leadership program for people from a variety of backgrounds who want to join the social sector. We've also started our first program for social sector professionals, the fundraising program, the first edition that's happening now, to build capacity for people already in the social sector. And the last but not the least is what we have right now, which is the ILSS online series, which is a set of online learning offerings to just enable professionals to bring a variety of speakers from very diverse backgrounds to really understand the work that several people are doing in the social sector. But now, though, we're going to switch gears and talk to the Led by Foundation team. It's such a privilege to be welcoming and introducing our speakers for today. First, right up front, we have Dr. Ruha, who started off as a doctor and then became a public health professional and then is now a social entrepreneur. You'll see her entire profile there on the slide. Very, very interesting profile and journey, and most importantly, the work that she and her team are doing. Ruha is a recent graduate from the Harvard University, was also awarded the Harvard Kennedy School Women's Leadership Award, and has worked with the Government of India's policy think tank, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, the Niti Aayog team. What she cares about most is market-oriented solutions to accelerate the economy's transition to a more cohesive, more respectful and inclusive model. And that's what we're going to hear more from Ruha in today's conversation. Welcome, Ruha. Really, really thrilled to have you. We also have with us two of Ruha's colleagues. So one is Shabina Begum Sheikh, who's the COO of Led by Foundation. Shabina, thank you for joining us here today. Who worked as an IT management consultant with KPMG, the state government of Andhra Pradesh, as well as had worked with Tech Mahindra before that, has a variety of experience. And Shabina is passionate about working on solutions that create inclusivity and increase access to everyone using technology. Shabina, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And last but not the least, we have Sumaya, who was the Led by fellow in the first cohort. And it's always interesting to hear from people who've gone through the programs that someone's designing. So Sumaya, really, really excited to have you join us today. Sumaya is currently a second-year MBA student at the IIM Calcutta campus, and she has a very, very lovely academic background, and her long-term vision is to take a leadership role in a leading organization 10 years down the line. And so today we're going to hear from these three lovely women on their journeys as well as what they do and why they do. I'm going to stop the screen sharing and welcome the three of you again. Thank you for joining us. We're really, really excited that you took out time to join us here today and talk about this really important work that you are doing. Ruha, I'm going to come to you first, and then I'm going to come to Shabina and Sumaya in a minute. So Ruha, tell us about your journey. Like what are the various experiences that you have? How did you go from being a doctor to a public health professional to now a social entrepreneur? What were the different factors that played out in your journey so far?
First of all, thank you for having me here, Archana, Anu ma'am, and the team of ILSS, and also the other 50-odd people that have joined us today. The reason I have this virtual background is because it's pitch black outside. I'm joining from Seattle and it's 6:06 a.m. right now. But I'm really happy to have this opportunity to discuss my work and talk about the M word that we'll be getting to. But before that, a little bit more about myself. So yes, my name is Ruha. I'm from Delhi. But I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. That's where I spent my first 10 odd years before my family moved to Delhi, Noida to be precise. And that's where I did most of my education. I went to middle school, high school, got my MBBS degree from Delhi, worked in a government hospital and then in a low income neighborhood in a small private practice before starting at an international health NGO, eventually joining the government of India or Niti Aayog. I then in 2018 came to Harvard on a full ride to attend a 2-year program called the Masters in Public Policy. And led by was something that was incubated in my second year. I graduated earlier this year. Led by is an incorporated not-for-profit right now, and our first cohort has graduated recently, Sumaya being one of our first few fellows. But the reason I tell you the story from practically the day I was born was to highlight two things. One is this move from Saudi Arabia to India, being a part of the religious majority in one and minority in the other. I do come from a Muslim family, was something that created a lot of empathy. And there's one story I'd like to share. We moved back to India almost exactly 20 years to the date, and it was Diwali the day we moved. So I remember very clearly getting out of Indira Gandhi International Hawai Adda and being driven to Noida. And I see all these houses decked in lights. I see kids bursting crackers. And the first thing that pops into my 10-year-old self is I never saw Vrinda, Madhur, or Rachna celebrate Diwali like this in Saudi. And soon enough, that was my reality. Eid would come and go. My friends wouldn't know about it. It was an optional holiday at the workplace I was at. And Eid is no fun if you don't have all your friends and family over to eat biryani and savaya. This is a more light-hearted micro experience, but you can imagine how these things snowball and add up and just weigh you down during your journey. So this was one thing that I wanted to highlight in my story. The other thing was this transition, and I will not use the word pivot, and I'll tell you why. This transition from being a clinical medicine doctor to working in public health and then coming in for public policy was made possible because of fantastic mentors that I had. But all these mentors were men, none of them were women, and hence none of them were Muslim women. And it made the journey extra lonely. Something that ties almost every led by member or fellow is we do have those moments more than a handful of times when we are the only Muslim woman in our college, in our school, in our workplace. So I was wondering, where are these Muslim women? We are 100 million in India. Somebody must have fallen through the cracks and made it to the top. So either that isn't happening, but that's not the case. There are people who've managed to get into positions of power or make it up the corporate ladder, but there still are internal and external factors withholding these people from achieving their full potential. And there aren't any platforms also to further support them, increase their visibility. So those are the two things. One was empathy from being a part of the majority and minority. And the second was my own lived experience going through school and college. And then when I got to Harvard, I chose a public policy course over a public health course because I wanted a more interdisciplinary lens. So to answer your question, Archana, I spent my first year trying to zoom out, and it really helped also getting away from India for a bit because you get a bird-eyes view of your country and get to see some things more clearly. So I zoomed out, I tried to take a step back and really think about what are the issues in terms of ecosystem that are withholding Indian Muslim women. Simple things like even the word isn't said, right? So first we're just stating that there is a problem of underrepresentation of Indian Muslim women in India's corporate environment, and then identifying what are the bottlenecks. So I spent the first year doing that. In my second year, I applied for Harvard's Social Innovation Fellowship, which is a fellowship program that selects 15 students from across the university and helps you take your social enterprise to the next level and provides you all sorts of resources. So along with my second year academics, I was also working part-time at Yale University on a healthcare project and co-chairing the India conference, but I was also incubating led by. And we got incorporated in April actually, and then launched operations in April. And then fellows like Sumaya joined on board in June, graduating mid-September.
Thank you so much, Ruha. It's very inspiring to hear about what has been the transition journey through these points. I will not use the word pivot in terms of what are the various influences that you've had, having gone through the journey, as well as several people in the form of mentors, etc., who've helped you. Very, very inspiring to hear that. Tell us a little more about the Led by Foundation itself. So, what do you have in mind as the vision for the foundation, and where does this fellowship fit in? Just tell us a little more about the work, the approach that you've taken, and why you do what you do.
Sure, I'll start sharing my screen because it's PowerPoint time now. So yeah, let's talk about the M word. So what are we? Led by is a leadership incubator. It's the first, hopefully not the last leadership incubator that works with high potential Indian Muslim women. We're super inclusive. That's why we put the X in our women, with the goal of creating equal opportunities for a population of 100 million. Another thing I wanted to highlight is, who are we? So we spoke about me a little bit, but kindly notice how this entire tier is full of MBA graduates everywhere from Harvard to IIM Ahmedabad to Duke. And they all see value in the mission that we're trying to achieve. Why do we exist though? First of all, there isn't enough data, but this one dated article shows you back from 2015 that Muslims are underrepresented in corporate India. There isn't a breakdown with regards to seniority or male, female, but if you were to look at corporate representation in terms of board composition, Muslim women are underrepresented by a factor of 100. And this is the reason why we exist, is to address this underrepresentation. Why do we do what we do? That's because our goal is to have a sustainable economy and democracy. We believe that it needs to be socially inclusive. And that's how we are working, which is by giving Muslim women greater support in terms of mentorship, in terms of advice, in terms of skills, to be able to transform their momentum of education into actually being empowered professionals. Now, coming to why should you care? And the reason for that is, most of you over here are executives, you work for organizations that could play a role in this. And there's enough data to show that having a diverse, and especially a culturally diverse team, helps your company to outperform. There's a bunch of studies, I won't go through them in detail, but there's enough data to show diversity helps. It helps. I mean, not only is it the moral right thing to do, but it also makes economic sense. And the reason we're having this conversation with you is that there is so much each executive over here can do. What's really interesting is that a majority of jobs, this is a CNBC report, a majority of jobs are actually secured by networking. And networking only works insofar as how much can you leverage your resource or your network, which depends on how big your network is. Now that's one way, but even after you get into an organization, studies show that sponsorship programs where senior executives actually vouch or advocate for underrepresented employees and juniors have a more lasting effect within the organization's diversity and inclusion culture. But you might be thinking, isn't this a pipeline issue? How am I supposed to look for Muslim women or get Muslim women to mentor in my organization if there just aren't any? The answer is yes and no. So it is, but it isn't. So not putting in numbers, but this really simple graph shows you that you have these women who get their education. Yes, it is a leaky and narrow pipeline, but the women who do manage to overcome this and get into the employment space, those are the women that are under your control as allies. So we're focusing right now, I'm addressing executives, regardless of what your religio-cultural background is. Now, what Led by does is helps this, right, is to transform your momentum of education into being empowered professionals. But these women are the ones who can create this positive feedback through the role model effect and get more women into education. So we need this sucking sound to be made. And this sucking sound, this demand can be created by the work that you do, by the advocacy that you do, and by the allyship that you exhibit. Coming to Led By. So what we do to help these women or to support these women is provide a host of services. I won't go into, again, too much detail into our programming. This is what our first cohort's key features were. For 2021, we're also adding executive coaching and expanding our university partners. And these are what success metrics look like. We judge it on the basis of the individual fellow, the kind of supportive tribe or immediate ecosystem that we create, and then the long-term community effects. And these are what the numbers looked like for 2020. So the fellowship for 2020 had three major arms that focused on these three top skills identified by the fellows. Two things that I wanted to highlight was the fact that we had 100% attendance practically throughout the fellowship. And the second was a proxy net promoter score of 9.86 by the fellows, showing that there is a huge demand amongst the Muslim women population, especially in colleges, for leadership training. These are our projected numbers for the next 5 years. We hope to be reaching out to 25,000 Indian Muslim women in colleges. This year, through our work, we've reached out to 1,500 already. Before I move forward, I'm going to pause my screen share over here and get back to Archana. I think that was a lot of programming detail for Led By. So I'm going to not share any more PowerPoints unless there's a question from the audience. But back to you, Archana.
Thank you so much, Ruha. It's very inspiring to see the self, the tribe, and the community. I think as you look at the funnel, to be able to think about not just what's going to happen to the fellow in this journey, but also what we really want for the wider community and the nation through this. I'm going to bring on Sumaya, one of your fellows from the first cohort, to hear from you, Sumaya. Tell us what drew you to the fellowship? What was your experience like? And what were some of the rich learnings that you took away in this process? Would love to hear from you.
Sure. Thanks, Archana. So good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by giving a brief background about myself, and then I'll go on to speak about how and why I got associated with Led By and my fellowship experience. So I'm from a district called Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu, from a typical Orthodox Muslim family with three sisters. So we literally kind of fought our way to pursue education because that was not a luxury for girls in our community. So I'm a computer science engineering graduate, a gold medalist and university rank holder. After graduation, I joined Infosys. I worked there for like 4 years as a developer. Later, I joined State Street. It's a US investment bank, basically, and I worked on their IT side to manage their risk application. Parallelly, on the personal front, soon after my graduation, I got married. So again, a very supportive partner. So I got married in 2012, and we have a 7-year-old daughter, Hiba. So again, my source of energy comes from her. So yeah, so 2012 is when I graduated, and I got back to full-time education by joining Calcutta for MBA in 2019. So it's like a 7-year gap. So it's not like this MBA dream was something that popped up all of a sudden. It was always there, but I had like a lot of responsibilities I had to give it that time before joining back for MBA. So that's about me. So now coming to why and how Led By. So it was like I just saw this email about Led By in my college inbox one day. I got intrigued immediately by the idea of, a fellowship program for minority women. I click on the URL, and I see Led By's website. So that was like even more intriguing. And then I see Ruha's profile. Like I go on and I check about Ruha, what she has done, and that was really inspiring to see that. So there are two major things why I got personally attached with Led By as such. One is that, um, so like Ruha also highlighted, throughout my journey, like may it be in school or in college, in all the places, it was like I was the only Muslim girl. Even at workplace. So I worked for like 5+ years. I've not met many Muslim women. So basically, uh, that professional network for Muslim women in itself, it was lagging. And there is a reason to have it also, because the problems that we face are uh, little bit different from the general problems that women community face, because so we have this added level of filter because the restrictions on women by the Muslim community itself. So that was one reason. And second thing, because I've experienced all those challenges and come here, I wanted to kind of help back the Muslim women in my community. So I saw this as an opportunity to achieve that as well. So yeah, so I go ahead and apply. Yeah, I get this email. I cleared that first round, and next round is that interview schedule with the panel, and then I give that interview with Ruha and the panel. It is very interesting, the interview process itself. So to be honest, I got more involved with led by through this process of application, interview, and all that stuff. So yes, I get selected. I get this email, congratulations, you're selected, and then I get my led by welcome packet. So I'm mentioning these details because every step was so meticulously planned. So I always got inspired how and what's the level of planning that goes behind. It's not just like it definitely surpassed my expectations. It's not just like a fellowship program you just go in. Everything was so professional and meticulously planned. So the welcome packet, it had details of all the sessions that was planned for us in this 3 months. So yeah, the session started. To be honest, it was quite rigorous, but worth the time and the effort. So one side, we were kind of honing our professional skills. So I distinctly remember we started with Benjamin on our norm setting document. We had like amazing speakers. We did storytelling exercises, communication exercises, negotiation workshops. So one thing that was phenomenal was at every step, it was not one-way communication. It was always, we were our opinion, our voices were taken into consideration. That was like super amazing. And then I definitely highlight this super important thing, which for me is like the best thing that Ledby is doing. So we have this set of in-house mentors. So throughout my education career till this day, I never got a mentor. It makes it all different, to get a mentor at an early stage who can guide you on your education choices, on your career choices. So we get this opportunity. So you have this set of mentors. You can choose, you can talk to them, you can kind of build that professional connect with them for future help also. So all this was happening on the professional front. And parallelly, so uh, on the personal side also, it was like amazing because every session it started with a pulse check, wherein kind of you share like what have you been doing for that week. So you get to know each other fellow. So initially it was like 24 different people in the room, but as weeks and sessions progress, we got to know each other better. And one of the deliverable as part of the fellowship itself was to record our conversations with the fellows. So that was like super amazing because initially it felt like 23 fellows I had to individually interact, talk to them, and then record that. But as we progressed through it, we understood, it was just amazing. Most of us, we were able to connect instantly because we kind of had that same background, kind of that Muslim women coming from that background and doing like somewhat better educationally. All of us had this passion towards education. So that building of the tribe was one of the best parts, I would say, because now you like have a professional um, network of women. Now you can reach out to people who kind of think um, kind of what do you say, kind of you can kind of match with them. They understand you instantly. So that's amazing part. So all this can be summed up uh, by saying so all of us were studying, and then it was difficult to manage time. It was difficult to put in that time for those exercises, efforts, everything. But towards the last session, um, all of us were feeling that void. Okay, now this fellowship is over, and we were kind of missing it. And that 10 minutes of silence when we were just staring at each other's eyes. That kind of sums up, all that bond that we built over here. So I sincerely thank Led by and the entire team here organizing this for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Sumaya. I promise I did not pay Sumaya to say that. And even if I were to write it myself, I wouldn't be able to do that good a job. Thank you. I also want to highlight to everybody listening in that Sumaya and I and nobody else between that have actually met in person. This has been an entirely virtual endeavor. And it feels like we've had like innumerable cups of chai together still. I also wanted to echo something that Sumaya said, which is really interesting. So she mentioned how she never really had mentors before. And this reminds me of a study that I found super interesting. It was a study held, I believe, at BCG, so one of the top management consulting firms. And they asked women at the time of leaving BCG, what was the number one thing you could change about the firm? And they did not say work-life balance. They said mentors. They wished that they had somebody who cared about them and who asked about them. And we don't think about that, right? When women drop off the pipeline, you think it's because of that. But surprisingly, this was the interest that was underlying those actions. I also wanted to just go back to what I'd mentioned about pivots and why I hadn't used the word pivots. Just coming back to the audience is there is a common thread between the changes that had happened in my personal journey, personal professional journey, and is also visible in Led by fellows who come from all of these amazing backgrounds, is that at the core of everything we do is impact. And which is why movement shouldn't necessarily be seen as pivot, because it's still in complete alignment with what your North Star has always been. Anyway, that's what I wanted to take space. Thank you again, Sumaya. Back to you, Archana.
Thank you, Ruha, and thank you so much, Sumaya. Very, very exciting to hear from you. I know several people who've joined the webinar today were either thinking of joining the Led by Fellowship or potentially thinking of others to recommend. And so I think you've given us a very clear picture on what it did to you. If I may, I'm very curious, how are you thinking about your post MBA journey? And as a member of this tribe now, what are some thoughts and dreams that you have?
So yeah, first thing, like post MBA, professionally I'm looking for a role as a product manager, uh, but specifically with respect to a member of Led by. So I want to so whatever work Ruha and the team is doing, I'd like to be a part of it in helping, a future cohorts. And kind of like I told you, this mentoring is a big thing. It helps in a big way. For example, like when I was in school or college, I did not understand what course I had to select. That might look like very simple a thing, but that helps a lot. That changes a lot of things. So I'd like to, be a part of the Led by team and mentor our future cohorts and help people to go forward.
Thank you so much, Sumaya. I'm going to bring in Shabina now. Shabina, tell us about your journey with working with the AP government and then with KPMG to what brought you to Led by. Tell us a little more about your journey as well as what you do at Led by and what you see as that the role of that in this larger work.
Thanks, Archana. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. So, today I'd like to share with you two stories. One, which are like really close to my heart and which bring out the privilege and which I consider to be the biggest privilege of my life. So, I was born in a place in Krishna district from Andhra Pradesh, in a rural setup, in a very conservative family. And my father had 9 siblings, my mother had 3 siblings, so it was a very large extended family, and we did not have even a single graduate from the family till the day I graduated. So here's my story. So what happened was, when I was 4 years old, my mom and dad were thinking about where to get me, which school to join me. And naturally, all my relatives or my neighbors, they all suggested my parents to join me in a local school, because that's local government school, First, because it's free. And according to them, my parents also have to save to give quality education for my brother, younger brother, who is going to join the school next year. So here in my community, girls, education for girls is always a secondary thing. So the main objective whenever you have a girl child in the family is that you complete whatever minimum schooling you have, and once she is enough age to get married, she has to get married. So that was the kind of mindset everybody had. But my parents were different. Both my mother and father promised each other that they will give me the best possible education, and that will be something is the only thing that they'll give us. So what my father did was, when I was 4 years old, he took me to the best possible school in my locality, and he asked for an admission. To his surprise, the school management denied an admission, stating the reason. The reason is like this: Muslim community in my locality did not really value education. So whenever a girl child joined the school, so whenever things are a little difficult for them, the first thing they do is to stop the girl child from going to school. So that was a very had a very big impact on their numbers. They also have their impact numbers, right? So they stopped taking in Muslim girls, mainly because they wanted to be the best school. But my father did not give up. He did not also take offense. He left his work. He went there every day. He just stood outside the principal's office until one day the principal called him inside and said that he's finally giving me an admission because of my father's persistence. So that, to this day, I feel is the biggest privilege in my life. So this is one part of the story. Fast forward, I completed my 10th standard from the same school. I was the top 1% of the state. I completed my intermediate being the top 2% of the entire state. And then I gained engineering seat in the best college in Andhra Pradesh. So throughout my journey, echoing what Ruha and Sumaya already mentioned, I was the only Muslim girl always. And I did not initially notice this. So we don't actually think about it. But it became more and more visible to me as I kept growing and as I kept moving forward. So as long as I was in Andhra, I was rationalizing it, saying that the Muslim population is already very less. It's around 8.5%. And once I moved to Accenture, started working there, I thought things should change. And then I still found the same thing. Out of a batch of 60 students that were selected, I was again the only Muslim girl. And then I cleared CAT, joined the best MBA college in India, IIM Ahmedabad. Out of the 500 students, again, I was the only Indian Muslim girl. So the ratio kept going worse and not improving. So this was a very big gap and it was eating me. And the more and more I realized it, I also started feeling very, very thankful to my parents and to all the support system I had who kept me going, because not being just a graduate from a Muslim family, from a conservative setup, being given the freedom to start my career and then leaving that career, doing an MBA in a different state, it was a very big thing in my family. So these are the two things. One is the lack of people, so the lack of Muslim women themselves. So like Ruha asked, where have these 100 million Muslim women gone? Everywhere. Why can't I see them? That was the question that was always there. So I feel like there are two reasons for it. One is, even if they are there, we don't know, they are very handful and they are very scattered. There's no community or no support system or no network that brings them together. And then it's not because there is no potential in all these 100 million girls. It's because there is no support system. There are no allies. I wonder how many girls would have been in professional spaces had they been given the same privilege and support that my parents had given them. So this, both of these we are trying to give from Led by Foundation, and it constantly motivates me and inspires me to keep working for the foundation. So coming to your question on what I do with Led by Foundation, I am the Chief Operating Officer here. I manage the operations, and the main, to simply put, my main role is to make sure that the fellows, the mentors, all the stakeholders of the foundation, whoever we get in touch with, have the best possible experience throughout their journey with the Led by Foundation.
Thank you, Shabina. It reminds me of, of that famous quote that it takes a village to raise a child. And it seems like there have been so many people, particularly your father, and I'm sure the rest of your family, who played a critical role in your journey. And at the same time, your own hard work and perseverance to be almost the topper in everything that you've taken up. I think it's very inspiring to hear about. And I'm seeing this almost as a trend across all the three of you, right? In that, what is the journey that you've gone through, and almost feeling connected to, therefore, what is the responsibility that I have to be able to bring this to more women, to more Indian Muslim women. So, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to come back to Ruha. And Ruha, tell us about, so for the fellowship, you've chosen a very niche area of um, Indian Muslim women who are currently pursuing their UG/PG. And I'm sure there are some factors that went into picking this particular group, right? Now, there are several people who are attending this who wrote to us saying, what if I've already finished college and I'm working now? Can I be part of the fellowship? And so just tell us a little bit about what were some factors that you had in mind to choose this particular group? And what are some avenues if people are keen, if let's say if they've already finished college and they're currently working, what are some ways for them to get engaged?
Thanks, Archana. So when we were looking at how to address this problem of underrepresentation, looked at organizations working along the pipeline. So there has been a lot of work happening with primary education and school education. Then you have scholarships for colleges. And plus, fortunately, in India, at least the government colleges are heavily subsidized. So it's not too much of a financial debt to go into college in India as compared to, say, what happens in the US. A space that was completely uncatered to is that transition phase from college to getting into the workspace, or that young professional space in India, and especially for this community. I'd also tell you a fun incident that happened. We were meeting somebody really high up in the government to talk about Led By. And the official that we were speaking with, their responsibility was to address the education needs of a community that was our target community. And when we told them about Led By, their response was, oh, but we are not a talent management agency. And that is the perception, right? That professional development, soft skills, leadership skills, things that will set us apart in the workspace are considered something very frivolous, very superfluous, or highly complimentary, and disassociated with what it actually takes, which is completely, entirely untrue. Coming from some exposure in the universities that I've visited and studied at over the last 2-3 years, leadership, negotiations, understanding what adaptive leadership is, being able to tell your story are the most sought after courses in these universities for graduate students, because that is what sets you apart tomorrow. And I think that's something that's been known about, and I'm expanding this to our nation, right? Indians are phenomenal hard workers, right? All said and done about our rote learning, I really enjoyed the school system insofar as it pushed me in terms of knowledge. I thoroughly loved my H.C. Verma for physics and my Agarwal and R.D. Sharma for math. But there was a complete absence of Ruha being able to step onto stage and speak. And that was important even in terms of, say, being a doctor, right? So when I was in medical school, all we do is just like 12-hour classes and studying at least 6 months before your exam starts. But how do you make a name for yourself as a doctor? You write papers, right? You do research, you go and present your stuff. Was any of this being taught in medical school? No. Is any of this being taught in other professional schools where these skills are also relevant? No. And that's why we were focusing on this particular segment. And I agree again that the entire pipeline is narrow and leaky. If I had all the resources on this planet and more, I would address all these problems. but I am addressing this one singular problem right now, and hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to expand the scope of it, because right now nobody is addressing this problem. Nobody's even talking about the problem, and a lot of people don't even see the problem.
Thank you so much, Ruha. Like, one has to begin somewhere, right? And I can see why perhaps you picked an area that you saw as if we really plug in here. Then not only is it helping people join the workforce, but also in terms of like what they do there, in terms of the ripple effect that perhaps it creates across the network. I'm going to ask you to take a step back and go back to your journey. One of the attendees here had asked a question. So on your journey in itself, Ruha, what is it as you are doing this work in leadership? How does it feel to take up the mantle of you being a young Muslim woman leader out there in the field? What has been that experience like? Tell us more about it.
It's actually been very pleasant. I do believe that the work we're doing is not necessarily in leadership, it is an effort in nation building. And while we were creating our launch or ramp up or runway to Ledby's eventual big bang release, we thought about a lot of scenarios that could go wrong, what pushback could we get, and not only terms in pushback from the majority or people outside of the community. Also, by the way, the word community depends on which identity I'm holding, right? Like if I start talking as a woman, my community is women. If I'm talking about Muslims, then it's that. When I'm talking about my community in my classroom at Harvard, it's Indians. But at least for the sake of this conversation, I'm holding my Indian Muslim woman identity together. So sorry, I just like, it's also a thing that I'm super, super passionate about. But as we were preparing, we were thinking about scenarios that could go wrong, either in terms of pushback from outside of the community or pushback within the community, and even things at a much intricate level, which is, say, pushback from the fellows that we are working with. What about their family, right? So we had all of these scenarios planned out and had measures to address some of them, and at least had thought about most of them. So what this helped us with was, when we eventually launched, we were so mentally prepared to get pushback that I don't think it fully even registers anymore. All I see are allies and supporters. And another story, fun story. So Samaya has to drop off because she has to go back to doing assignments for IM Calcutta. But a really cool thing that happened was we had a lot of conversations about identity on the sidelines of the fellowship. The main crux was workshops on adaptive leadership, growth mindset, storytelling. But they spoke a lot about identity as well. And as an Indian Muslim woman, just using these words is considered to be political. But a big aspect of who we are is to be able to comfortably say that. So that's why our website says it, our social media handles say it. However, we were slyly told by a couple of consultants that we were working with for some legal paperwork that you might want to drop the M word and use underprivileged or minority or disempowered. And more than the team, it was the fellows who said, that's a bad idea because we don't want to do that. The whole point is to change the narrative, is to create a more empowering narrative, right? We are not the disenfranchised, we are not the underprivileged, we aren't going to hide under this cloud of saying the word minority. There is a community within India that has the worst socioeconomic indicators when compared to other communities. It obviously needs targeted efforts. Let us say it, let us identify the problem, but also use empowering words to change not just the narrative for people outside of the community, but even the psyche of people within the community. So finding these supporters within the fellows, with their family and allies beyond it has actually made this entire journey quite optimistic, supportive, and encouraging. So the experience so far has been great. I do anticipate things not being this rosy in the future, but again, I think just being mentally prepared for that helps. And also, growth is painful, right? This is not going to be easy. If it was easy, people would have done it. But it is going to be a challenge. But that's what I love about our country, is all these challenges are just opportunities for people like you and me to solve problems. Back to you.
Love that spirit. Wherever there is a challenge, whether it's, and I've been hearing that quite a lot, even in the context of COVID, right? Of course, it's such a big challenge. However, what would it take for us to almost reorient ourselves and see what is an opportunity? And I'm hearing you and seeing you do this beautifully to say, yes, it is going to be challenging, but what are some ways to get around it? Thank you so much, Ruha. I'm going to take on more questions that have been coming in from our attendees today. What have you observed about the role and participation of Indian Muslim men in the corporate sector? And are you seeing that that's to, like, what is the opportunity there? How does that impact in any way? What's the role of Indian Muslim women? What are some insights that you have on that?
Thanks for that question. When we were identifying issues or bottlenecks, we did club it into internal and external factors. External factors being outside of the Muslim community, so systemic discrimination, lack of opportunities, and internal factors being within the Muslim community. So things that Indian women are quite comfortably, well, we can say quite comfortably experienced with now, is just patriarchy, lack of emphasis on female education. And when I say that we need allies between both these buckets, right? You need allies outside of the Muslim community, and you need allies within, that is the men of the community. A lot of our fellows were actually told about led by through their brothers, which I think was really cool. My biggest allies are both of my brothers. They are probably the two most feminist men that I have met in my life. And I've been very lucky to be given this hand of cards, which is my fantastic family, but I don't want people's success or mentors or allies to be dependent on luck. So that's again something that we're trying to address with Led By. But as for what has our experience more broadly been with men from the community, there is an underrepresentation of Muslims in general also. But we've definitely interacted with way more Muslim men who are high up in the business space in corporate India, and they have been supportive. Nobody has come and said, don't do this. People have only said, expand your scope. And I think, again, that's sad but validating. It's validating because, yes, there is a need, and sad that there is just too much of a need right now and beyond our resources at the moment. Back to you.
That's so true in terms of it's been very encouraging to hear about your own story, as well as several fellows being nominated by brothers, by other men in the family. I think it's like we always say, right? In order to tackle one side of the coin, can we also look at the other side of the coin and to be able to see what's an enabling role? So very, very glad to hear that. There was another factor that one of the attendees had as we're talking about gender. What's the role within Muslim religion? What's the role that caste plays in this work? And have you observed any differences based on caste within the religion, caste and class within the religion? And are you seeing any differences there? And what are some ways to tackle that?
One of the things that makes Muslims Indians is the caste system within Muslim community. Yeah, this might rub people off the wrong way, but it's true. It happens. It happens in every sense of the word, and which is why, again, being intentional about it. So this new buzzword, which I don't like because it's a buzzword, but it still makes a lot of sense, is intersectionality, right? You can't talk about anything without really thinking about all the layers that are there. And even within the Muslim community, yes, there is a caste structure, or there is a subtle caste system that goes in, but lands up playing a big role. So at least at the foundation, we are quite cognizant of it in terms of the fellows that we select. So we try to make sure that there is representation in terms of geography, in terms of caste, in terms of class, in terms of religiosity, in terms of even the spectrum of identifying as a woman. And the only way to really go about it is actually pretty simple. It's diversify the community you live in, diversify the kind of voices you let in and the people that you talk with.
Thank you, Ruha. This is very, very interesting to hear. Another question that we have is about, given that today we have such few success stories in this field, and yet it's so important not just for women to have success in their corporate career, but also finding some way in which that it translates to a larger society or a community impact. What are some stories or examples that you can share with us about what is the opportunity and potential there is when Muslim Indian women are successful in a corporate career, and the trickle effect it has on just the overall society community? Any examples, or like it could be even things that really inspire you or things that are in the works? Would just love to hear about some examples and some stories.
So, well, first of all, we have 50 odd advisors and residents who are Indian Muslim women who've made it. And at least half of them are in the corporate space. So all of those are fantastic stories of people. I would also like to open up the floor to Shabina if she wants to share any particular mentor's story, because she works more closely with them. But one thing that I do want to highlight, at the risk of bringing up problems over and over again, but it's really important to identify the problem first, is when you work in a system or in an environment that reminds you of who you are, not in a pleasant way, you spend a lot of energy in whitewashing or hiding or just not even catering to that identity. And what that translates into in the long term is you work so hard to get to where you are by not acknowledging or not playing or not being super cognizant of that identity, is that when you do get the power or the resources or the wherewithal to do something and to impact change, you've just spent so much time not thinking about that identity that you don't even go back to that community to serve it. And that makes sense, right? If you are in a difficult environment, you don't want to be associated with a community that might be considered political or might be considered unprofessional for no real good reason. And we've seen that with a number of people that we interacted with and we wanted to onboard as advisors, who were Indian Muslim women who said, we do not want to be associated with an organization that openly says that, it's for Indian Muslim women. I also just want to pause here to explain who these advisors are. So the fellowship program that we run for college-going Indian Muslim women over the summer, it's a co-curricular program, and that's what Samaya was a part of this year. That has 3 arms. So it has workshops done on leadership skills by international faculty. It has executive coaching, which is going to be new for 2021. I showed it to you for a hot second on the deck. Over there, global executive coaches are going to have individualized sessions with our fellows. And then the third is an advisory framework where our fellows get to have office hours or one-on-ones with industry experts. They also get to get peer mentored as well as get up mentored by middle school or high school Muslim girls. So this down mentoring by industry experts for 2020 was done by exclusively Indian Muslim women with 10 years or more of work ex. I'm talking about those people. But in 2021, side note, we're expanding that advisor pool to just women, Muslim, non-Muslim, Indian, non-Indian. But just coming back to 2020, we had some 50 odd advisors in residence. We did have a number who never got onboarded because they didn't want to associate with the community that they belong to for reasons that kind of make sense, but still hopefully won't exist in the future. Shabina, do you have anything to add about a particular mentor?
Yeah, Shabina, would love to hear from you on what are some experiences you've had having seen the mentors work with the fellows.
For me personally, picking and choosing one mentor is really, really difficult because all these women are so awesome and, you know, where they are right now, they are highly successful. They do not even have time, but they still try to take out time for these kids, for the fellows, and they have never ever said. So once they are onboarded, they have been always supportive, and we are really surprised by the kind of support they gave us, the kind of interest they showed in the program, and we are really thankful to each and every one of them in our own way. and it's really hard. So if you want me to pick one, so it's really hard. Everyone, so we have journalists, we have activists, we have filmmakers, we have finance directors. So we are spread out. Our mentors are there in every sphere.
That's great to hear. And Ruha, I heard you mention that this year we are widening the mentor pool to all Indian women. I know we have several women leaders who are joining us here today. And one of the questions that got repeated by the attendees is, how can I help? And so here's an invitation. And of course, the team will share more, but the Led by Foundation is accepting applications for their 2021 fellowship as well as for you to be a mentor. And so definitely for all the people who are interested out here, please do find ways to engage with them. I'm going to come back to some other questions that we have. I would just love to hear your insights on what are you hearing about what it is for women in the workplace. I know that the fellowship is not really looking at that space today, but what are you learning about the experience for Indian Muslim women at the workplace? What's easy? What are some challenges? And what are some ways in which we can, everyone attending this forum, can perhaps make it more inclusive? Would just love your perspectives on that.
Thanks. It's hard to make a generalized statement because our experiences, at least in terms of how we are treated at the workplaces, vary a lot. Some workplaces are more hostile than others. Some are actually fantastic workplaces. So it's a little hard for me to draw any sweeping generalization, but I could address the latter half of your question, which is what can people do to make workplaces more inclusive? Well, one is what we mentioned earlier, which is sponsorship. And that means not in the word that we usually talk about, but in terms of you advocating for underrepresented women who are junior employees and helping them more than just providing them mentorship or advice, but seeing their name in a room of opportunities would be super helpful. Second is, if you don't see these women around in your workplace, start asking questions. Why is that happening? And the whole issue with diversity and inclusion is you don't want to do it at the risk of taking less merit-based candidates. But even through the fellowship, right, we have seen that there is a pipeline. And if you are slightly more intentional, you will be able to find a well-suited candidate, or you can come to us and we'd be happy to help you out with that. A number that I'm super proud of is for 2021, our applications are live, like you just mentioned, Archana, and we are scouting for high potential college going Indian Muslim women towards their final few years of college. For 24 spots, we have already received more than 700 applications. And that is the pool of self-selecting people, by the way. It's a pretty intimidating application process. So there is some amount of merit that can already be attributed to them by virtue of them going through this process. So I think being more intentional about the pipeline that you're even selecting from could lead to a lot more diversity in your junior rung, and then you being intentional about sponsoring them, advocating them, in addition to mentoring them, could be very, very effective steps. And I don't think any of us should forget just how incredibly powerful you are. Each one of you over here has the ability to transform dozens of lives by virtue of where you've made it today. And I'm sure you will. Back to you, Archana.
Thank you, Ruha. I'm going to come back as a follow-up in a little while from now, again, to this question of what are the various ways that people can engage with the foundation and work. But for now, it seems like, although we've shared that we picked a certain group of women in UG, PG right now, several people still have questions about considering the pipeline challenges, for example. Have you thought about an intervention, maybe a supplementary to this, at the high school or the early college stage? As you are doing this work, what are you learning about that? And similarly, there was another question about, as you're doing this work, do you have something planned for Muslim men at some point of time? So these were some questions that came up, and would just love, what are you learning on this work, and any thoughts that you have on this?
Great, thank you. As for how you can associate with led by, I'll let Shabina answer that eventually. She'll talk about city chapters, she'll talk about advisors and residents, and she'll talk about organizations who can reach out to us to have us consult them on diversity and inclusion through a faith-based system. But coming to, are we looking at colleges and high school or early college high school? So we are actually. So our work is predominantly on high potential folks or Indian Muslim women towards the end of their college or in a master's program. But we are also doing pipeline activities ourselves. So for that, what we're doing is we're investing in hosting webinars, outreach activities with college students and a couple of high schools. So we've done the 1,500 people that I mentioned that we reached out to is actually this bucket. So we are also intentional about creating that pipeline, pulling in, creating that sucking noise from high school and early college. The fellowship is over here, which is late college or masters. And then another thing that we have running are our city chapters, which are these invite-only paid membership platforms of 10 to 25 Indian Muslim women who meet every month for a year. And they're facilitated sessions or structured sessions led by us, in which you have a couple of workshops, some book clubs, and some places to just have kitchen cabinets, which is a term that we use for having a group of unofficial advisors who help you think through a problem. So the city chapters are open to everyone who identifies as an Indian Muslim woman, although it is an invite-only platform. And then the webinars and workshops happen for high school and early college folks. So that's happening in addition to the fellowship that we've spent most of today talking about.
Sounds good. Shabin, I'm going to come back for you to share more details on this. Ruha, anything that you've thought about for Muslim men in this work? That's another question. And what are you learning about it? Have you had to do this?
So we engage with Muslim men again through means of having allies. So we have ally sections when we're talking about the larger community with our fellows. We have sessions, workshops also that are open to men and women both. So that happens mostly through an engaged model. Now, the ultimate goal of Led By, or sorry, not the ultimate goal, but I would argue that the product goal of Led By is to create the best damn co-curricular fellowship program that India has to offer to its college students. And nothing would make Led By happier than people coming to us and saying, hey, we want this for Muslim men. Hey, we want this for Dalits. Hey, we want this for Brahmins. And we'd be happy to share whatever we have, and you can white label it and reuse it or hash it out for the community that you want to. Again, just unfortunately, there's only so much bandwidth and resources that we have. And hence we're focusing on Indian Muslim women. But hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to expand. Or maybe if you are looking for an opportunity, happy to share with you what we have. And you could white label that and use it for a different target group.
That's great. How do you scale the idea and not the organization is something that came to my mind as you shared this, because the idea is so much more than perhaps what we see happening today, and what are ways in which, of course, Led By can also expand and grow into other areas of work, but perhaps it's a wider community we can as well. Ruha, I'm very curious on and we had Shabina talk about this when you shared that as you went into your B school, you found that at various points of time that you were perhaps the only Indian Muslim woman as part of the cohort. I'm just curious, like a little more, can you share on what are you seeing in this? Any, even in terms of perhaps you have statistics on how this has looked over, across time. What changes have we seen? Are there some universities or colleges where you're finding that they're doing something different to have a more diverse group? We'd just love to hear what you're noticing about the higher education sector in particular in terms of this diversity.
Sorry, was that question for me or for Shabina?
Would love to hear from both of you. I know Shabina spoke about her journey, so I'm just curious on, can you elaborate a little more on that? Would love to hear from both of you.
I'm going to give it to Shabina because I am tired of hearing my own voice.
Okay. So yes, that's statistically, it has been the same, though there has been a lot of improvement from education wise in the country. But recently, there has been an overall decline in the participation of women in workforce throughout, not just the Muslim community, but in India as a whole. The number of women in total have reduced, whoever is in the workforce. So there's something wrong that's going on, and it needs to be addressed. It's but again, coming back to your second question on if there are any institutes that are doing some things differently, yes, there are. Even if you take some IIMs, so some of the institutes are more diverse, but it all depends on the criteria of the institute. And the administration of the institute. But yes, there are institutes that encourage diversity a lot. Even in the best of the colleges, even in IIM Ahmedabad, even in other IIMs, they are constantly trying to increase the diversity. They are trying to bring in more women. The ratio of men to women has been constantly increasing, but not decreasing. So there has been a movement towards involving more and more women in general and even women of diversity.
Thank you, Shabina. That's encouraging to hear. Ruha, anything that you wanted to add on what you're seeing?
No, we can move on to the next question. I'm excited about a couple of questions that are there. So looking forward to.
That's great. So there was a question about the organization itself, and I saw that you answered in the chat window. I'm just gonna ask a little more about that. Tell us how does fundraising work for your organization, and what are you learning about that?
Great. So we were pre-seed funded by Harvard itself, and that's where the bulk of our money came. Otherwise, we are a collective philanthropy, so we get a lot of money through donations and gifts, and that's how we work basically right now. So it's essentially a philanthropy, and we are a registered not-for-profit. Couple of years away from tax exemption, though it's a long-term process, but that's how we work.
That's helpful. Thank you, Ruha, for that. So there's a question from Shivani here in terms of what are your thoughts on the hijab, and do you see it as an example of how women's clothing is politicized? I'm curious on what are your perspectives on that?
Everything about women is politicized. As for the hijab, coming back to what happened over the summer with the fellows, I mentioned that we were quite intentional with the spectrum of religiosity also that our fellows came from. So you had a couple of fellows who wore the hijab. You had a couple of fellows who actually during the interview with Led By said that, hey, I'm not entirely sure I'm Muslim enough for this. And we said that you need to self-identify as an Indian Muslim woman. And we aren't going to ask you to prove any of those three identities. And then over the summer, like I mentioned, there were a lot of conversations on identity. And being able to see these young women, their average age was 23, to meet virtually, talk about something as personal as the hijab. And mind you, there were polar opposite views even within this group of 24. Was it incredibly reaffirming experience? Because when the CA protest happened last year, and even earlier this year, we were talking about how the secular movement in India will be revived or led by Indian Muslim women. But over the summer, watching these women come to actually being able to host conversations and come to at least some common minimum understanding makes me 100% confident that the feminist movement in India will be led by Muslim women, just because of the sheer diversity of issues that are there. But this will only be possible if we give them these platforms to come together and have these conversations in safe spaces, and then give them the agency to go out and talk about it. So that's my look at the hijab. I just think it's something that could possibly exemplify how to have difficult conversations on polarizing opinions.
And Shabina, anything that you want to add to that?
I think Ruha covered it pretty much.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ruha. So, one of the other questions that we had is, do you see perhaps education and financial independence as keys to overcoming religious biases in our daily lives, if done right, of course? What are some ways in which you've seen, like, what are some factors that have helped being more aware of religious biases and to be able to navigate them? Would education play a role? Would financial independence play a role? Are there other factors?
If done right. So we all know really educated people who are complete bigots. We all know really educated people who are completely misogynistic. But if it's done right, yes, it can definitely be a harbinger of social cohesion and harmony and development that is inclusive. So that's my take on education. As for financial independence, there are enough studies to show that empowering women with financial independence really helps flatten the power asymmetry between men and women. So both of them are phenomenally important, but both of them need to be done right.
Thank you, Ruha. I'm going to go back to just a little bit of your journey to say, in this entire journey of doing this work, were there moments where you were like, this is just so difficult, and I just don't know how to navigate it? Just share with us a little more about what were some really challenging moments in this journey, and I'm sure that there might have been many.
There have been a few. And most days, the team and I are phenomenally motivated. And I'm sharing this really candid experience / thought with everybody over here, because that's what I think will be relevant for ILSS audience, right? Where ILSS works with executives that want to pivot to the social sector and are looking for ways to go about it, or even understand it. If you are somebody who is in the private sector and is looking for a social challenge to address or jump ships, A, go ahead and do it. Do not think about it. But B, know that you will not suddenly wake up every day feeling fully energized and feeling like you can take on the world. As with everything, motivation can get you to it, but it takes discipline to stick to it. And that's what becomes important. Like, there are days that either you're demotivated because of something that's happened, or you're just feeling uninspired, or you're just like, actually, you know what? Nobody cares about Indian Muslim women except for me. Why am I even doing this? So you've got to keep doing it with discipline. But what helps me personally is, especially as a social entrepreneur, is surround yourself with crazy people. Surround yourself with people who are doing crazy things and trying to save the world, and talk to them every now and then. And that's what my speed dial, well, nobody has speed dial anymore, but my frequent call list has is just a number of crazy people who I call when I'm feeling low on energy, and then I hear the awesome things that they're doing, and I'm like, okay, I can do this. So that helps. Do it, don't think about it, and surround yourself with crazy people.
That's great. Very simple. Seems like a mantra there. Shashank has a follow-up question, Ruha, in terms of particularly about attracting sponsors for this work, and amidst all that's happening in the country and the world today. Like, what do you see as a USP for Indian Muslim women, and what have been some of your learnings to get more sponsors for this work?
Well, thanks for that question, Shashank. So I just want to read the question once more. It says, how do you plan to attract strong sponsorship for Indian Muslim women given the prevalent diversity classes? I'm wondering if that means that there are a bunch of underrepresented segments, and how do we focus attention on Indian Muslim women? Or is the question that Indian Muslim women is a politicized group, and how do you get people to even buy into the cause? Archana, what do you think? Is it the first or the second?
I think it's perhaps a second.
You think it's a second? Okay.
Yeah.
So as for how do you get people to buy into the cause, we do both things. So we share numbers and we share our personal stories. The issue is that Muslim women are in a way disempowered or underrepresented without even data, which is hard then. You don't even have the numbers to talk about this issue. There is something that McKinsey, which is one of the world's largest management consulting firms, something it does in the US. It comes out with a report called Women in the Workplace, which basically maps out what women representation is at different levels of management in corporate America. The thing over there is that companies
Ruha, I also
actually.
wanted to quickly interject and say Shashank's been kind enough to say no, it isn't the second.
Okay.
Apologies about that, Shashank. Thank you for clarifying. And so I just wanted to bring that back to you that now that we have the question clearer.
Fantastic. But just quickly saying that McKinsey does that report in the US, but companies buy in and actually share data. That report doesn't happen in India yet. And also getting data along religious lines in India is again something super contentious. But going back to the first thing, which is that there are multiple levels of underrepresentation in India, I completely concur with you, Shashank. And I'm not saying that the underrepresentation of Indian Muslim women is the only challenge that India has. It's the challenge that Led By is working on. It's the challenge that the team of Led By has personally faced and is trying to address. And we aren't talking about moving Muslim women's representation in the workplace to 30%. We're saying we're 8% of population and our goal state is to be 8% of corporate India. And how do we do that? There's a pipeline issue, yes and no. What can we do with the way things are right now is what we are focusing on. And pipeline issues are otherwise going to be much longer in terms of impact. So how do we go about it? We identify this as one of the problems, and we've been talking to corporates, executives, and starting this conversation in the workplace. And then we are addressing at least the immediate part of the pipeline through our fellowship and webinars and city chapters.
Thank you, Ruha. So I'm curious on, let's say 10 years from now, what do you see as the greatest impact of the Led By movement? And Anu's asking us that question.
Yeah, I would say 10 years from now, we should have a report of women in the workplace in India that gives you data on what representation looks like. And that data should have 4 to 8% Muslim women as making up at least the entry level positions across corporate India. That would be the goal state. Get at least to halfway point.
That's very, very encouraging to hear. And what do you see, like if you were to zoom out, and this is the data of Indian women in the workforce, if you were to zoom out and like what is your dream of India in this context? What would you say is your dream or vision for larger Indian society in general? And of course, the role of Indian women, Indian Muslim women in that.
I won't say that I imagine a completely uniform India. I'm one of those people who was raised in unity, in diversity, and I love that about our country, right? So I don't want to be a homogenized group 10 years, 20 years, or a lifetime down the line. But I want to see, and I know we will see, a society that does not discriminate, that gives equal opportunity, and that believes in the liberty and dignity of every individual, truly. And somebody actually, or a group of people actually wrote that down. I don't want anything more than for us to completely realize the vision that's in our preamble. And that would be the ultimate goal state of India, is just achieve the dream that we were born with.
We can bring our preamble alive at every single day and every single moment. I think that's a great one day to aspire for. Thank you, Ruha. I'm going to actually pause here, and we have several people writing and saying, so how can we help? And so I wanted to just provide space for Ruha and Shabina to go back and tell our attendees who are joining us today in terms of what are various ways in which they can get involved right from the fellowship to the mentor program to what is it that they can do in their own organizations, own cities. So we'd love to just hear from the two of you about how can this wider community get involved over the next 4 to 5 minutes before we close.
So I'll share my screen with a couple of ideas that we have, but I'll let Shabina do the talking and I can chime in. So being an advisor in residence is open for all the women who are joining us today. Partnering by virtue of the organization that you are working at is open to everybody who is a working professional today. And city chapters is something that's open for all the Indian Muslim women who've joined us today. Shabina, do you want to talk a little bit about city chapters especially?
So yes, city chapters is a new initiative that we are going to start. And what a city chapter basically is a place for women to de-stress, come together, and just get inspired and inspire and motivate other people. So as one, so there are two buckets to this. Again, before I talk about that, I will talk about what is the eligibility of city chapters. The eligibility is mainly that you identifying yourself as an Indian Muslim woman. When we say women, we are very inclusive. It's just enough if you identify yourself as a woman. Then this is an invite only platform, but as we are doing this webinar with ILSS, we are offering each and every woman here on this platform an early bird access, which will be completely free. Otherwise, the city chapter is a paid subscription and also an invite only subscription. So each member of the city chapters will have access to 12 modules, which are both professional and personal development related over a course of 1 year. They will also have a space to discuss and share their knowledge with each other. We also encourage peer mentoring as a part of the city chapters. We are also going to host book club discussions and a lot of fun stuff, which each of the city chapter gets to decide by themselves. This is going to be more interactive than a one-sided participation. So that's about the city chapters. We will share the link with you. We will take an interest survey, and once the city chapter, we will also share the registration link with all the interested participants. And we look forward to all of you subscribing to it. So coming back to again, so other ways to associate yourself with Led by Foundation, like Ruha already mentioned, if you are already a woman who has more than 10 years of experience and who is interested in the foundation's work and interested to mentor young girls, you can either nominate yourself, and if you know of someone who can be a great fit for this, please go ahead and nominate them. We will share our email IDs in the chat box. You can reach out to us directly with just a 150 worded bio of the person and why you think they are a good fit for the organization. And we are not just looking at Indian Muslim women here. We are saying this is open to all women. And then comes the campus ambassadors. So for now, we have been focusing on people who have already passed out of colleges. Now, let's say you're a student who have just joined your undergrad program and you're not eligible for the fellowship. How do you associate yourself with Led By? You can either become a member of the city chapters, or you can also become a campus ambassador. So if you know of someone, if there are in your family, there is a student who wants to be associated with Led By but still not eligible, you can encourage them to become our campus ambassadors. They also get to be a part of a lot of workshops, and they get to host webinars for their university. So these are a few things I wanted to add on top of partnerships that Ruha has already mentioned.
Definitely. So, Shabina, what I'm hearing is that for all women leaders attending here from the ILSS community, they can definitely reach out and perhaps be mentors if they are interested. What I'm also hearing is that for the wider community, if there are people here who are attending who are currently in UG or PG, they can nominate themselves and apply for the fellowship. Or, of course, for the wider community, We can also refer others to be either advisors in residence or applications. I do want to quickly, I know you all spoke about what is it that we can do in our organizations and how you work with organizations. Can you really quickly tell us about, we have several corporate leaders here who are keen to help, and in men included. So what are some ways in which that could happen?
Thanks, Archana. So we were talking to a couple of senior level executives when we were introducing Led By, and they said that they're pretty intentional about gender diversity, but they have no idea what the number is of Muslim men or Muslim women specifically in their organization. And if somebody actually told them that, hey, your Muslim women make up only 0.2% of the company, that the executive that we were talking to, they said, we'd be pretty jarred at this mega underrepresentation and would want to take corrective measures. It's just nobody even talks about it. So echoing or going back to a question that was raised earlier, right? That there are so many levels of underrepresentation, or rather so many communities that are underrepresented in different ways. So that leads to not all issues being highlighted. So sometimes just even talking about the issue really helps. So what we do with organizations and executives is help them to start thinking about what does the diversity or representation even look like within their corporation. There was a question that mentioned, oh, there's so many issues within gender diversity, or should we just focus on like getting it right with women and then we should focus on other things? And absolutely no. India is working on gender representation right now, and that again is a fantastic opportunity to do it correctly. Because if you talk about, hey, we just need to get women representation to 50%, and you don't think about all the caste, class, faith-based discrimination and layers that are there, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up just further exacerbating the inequities that are already there. Only the people with power and privilege will be able to leverage that women representation or affirmative action that's happening. That's why it's so incredibly intentional to be intersectional about it, be layered about it. So our work with organizations and executives helps them to start thinking about the problem within and even identifying what the magnitude is. So that happens by having conversations with the HR team. The second thing we do is we host workshops with the population or with the employee base. And the third is we also give them access to pipelines to be able to address this problem.
Thank you so much for joining us here today and talking to us about, just giving us insights about this work, your organization, and what is it that we can all do. Thank you so much, Ruha and Shabina. Very, very grateful. And such a pleasure in being in this conversation with you.
Before people drop off, one last thing that I wanted to say was, we are asked a lot how we're going to anticipate pushback, right? You're talking about them, you're mentioning the M word. And I have had way more people say, how are you going to address pushback than people who have pushed back? So the issue really is, I think we've in our mind just made up that this is a conversation that you can't have. And just looking at the chat box right now, people are being so incredibly supportive, Hindu, Muslims, men, women. And that has really been the dialogue. The thing is, we are just so afraid that we don't even bother having the conversation. And it's again such a happy feeling because we're having this conversation and you've been conditioned to believe you're going to get pushback. And now I'm almost like, where is all that pushback that we were prepared for? And everybody asks us that question, but I'm telling you, we haven't had half as many people push back as we've had people who've asked, Acha, what will you do? So it's been pretty liberating, encouraging, and validating to have that experience. And which is why I would want to iterate that if there is a social problem that you care for and you think it might be a little political or it might have pushback, well, first of all, it's supposed to have those feelings generated in the person who's ideating, because growth is painful, but the world surprises you. And if there's anything that we've seen is that the world is a much nicer place with way more allies than we were told we would have.
Thank you so much, Ruha. So not just on this particular thing that you picked up, but in terms of if there is a social issue, that cause that we feel passionately about, how do we start taking the first step and almost trust that there will be allies and that we'll find our sponsors, crazy and non-crazy people alike, to really build this work. What an inspiring message to end this evening on. Thank you so, so much for joining us here today.